I saw the letter on my mother's nightstand 3 days after the funeral, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with my name written in black ink, just Ashley, and underneath, in smaller letters, "Open only after I'm gone." I was 28 years old, sitting on the edge of her hospital bed in the house where I'd grown up, still wearing the black dress from the cemetery, and I couldn't bring myself to tear it open for another hour. When I finally did, there were documents inside, a private investigator's report, bank statements, and a handwritten note that started with 5 words I'll never forget. "Your father is alive, sweetheart." My mother had been sick for 6 months, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. During all that time, she'd never mentioned my father, not once, and I'd never asked. By my age, you stop asking questions about the man who wasn't there. You build a life without expecting answers. But now, sitting in the quiet of her bedroom with sunlight cutting through the Venetian blinds, I had answers, whether I wanted them or not. Let me back up. Let me tell you what my life looked like before that letter, because you need to understand how stable everything seemed, how impossible it felt that anything could change. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Arlington, Virginia, nothing fancy, but mine. I'd bought it 3 years ago with a down payment I'd saved for 5 years, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized tech company. The apartment had white walls, a small kitchen that opened onto the living room, and a balcony where I kept herbs in clay pots. Basil, thyme, rosemary. I cooked a lot. It was my thing. My best friend since college, Jennifer, lived 3 blocks away in a similar building. We'd grab coffee on Saturday mornings, usually at the Starbucks on Wilson Boulevard. She'd get a vanilla latte with an extra shot. I'd get black coffee and a blueberry muffin. We'd sit by the window and talk about work, about the guys we were dating or not dating, about her mother's constant criticism of her life choices. "She called me yesterday," Jennifer had said about 2 months before my mom died, stirring her coffee with a wooden stick. "And she literally spent 20 minutes asking why I'm not engaged yet. Like, Jen, you're only 31. But no, apparently I'm running out of time." I'd laughed and told her my mom was cooler than that, which was true. My mother, Linda, was a kindergarten teacher for 32 years. She had patience, real patience, not the fake kind. She never pushed me about boys or marriage or career ambitions. She just wanted me to be happy and to call her on Sundays. I called her every Sunday, even when I was busy, even when I was tired or hungover from Saturday night. She'd ask about my week, about work, about whether I was eating enough vegetables. She'd tell me about her students, the shy ones who needed extra encouragement, the smart ones who'd already learned to read before kindergarten, the difficult ones whose parents were struggling. "There's one little boy, Marcus," she'd said on a call in May, just before the diagnosis came back. "His dad's never around, and his mom works 2 jobs. He told me yesterday that he wants to be a doctor so he can help people like his grandma. He's 5 years old, Ashley. Can you imagine? 5, and he already has more purpose than most adults." I'd heard the wistfulness in her voice, but I'd misread it. I thought she was just tired from work. I didn't know she was already sick. Didn't know her pancreas was already betraying her. The cancer came fast. By the time they found it, it had spread. We did the chemo, the radiation, the whole brutal cycle. I took 2 weeks off work in July, then another week in August. My boss, Derek, was sympathetic, at first. "Take all the time you need," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder in that way that felt performative. By September, I could feel him getting impatient with the absences, even though I was working from home most of the time, checking emails at midnight, staying on top of my accounts. My mother died on a Tuesday in October. It was 6:47 in the morning. I was holding her hand. The hospice nurse, a woman named Carol with kind eyes and gray streaks in her hair, had told me the night before that it would probably be soon. "Her breathing's changing," she'd said quietly. "You might want to stay close." I'd sat in that chair all night, watching my mother's chest rise and fall, listening to the rattle in her lungs. At one point, around 3 in the morning, she opened her eyes and looked right at me. "You're going to be okay," she'd whispered. "Better than okay. You're going to find out who you really are." I didn't understand what she meant. I thought it was the morphine talking, the body's last confused messages before shutdown. I squeezed her hand and told her I loved her. She closed her eyes. 3 hours later, she was gone. The funeral was small. Just me, Jennifer, a handful of my mother's colleagues from the school, and our neighbors, the Hendersons, who'd lived next door for 15 years. The priest said nice things about her dedication and her warmth. Someone cried. I stood there in my black dress, feeling like I was watching the whole thing from underwater. It wasn't until the next day, when I went back to my mother's house to start sorting through her things, that I found the letter. And that's when everything started to unravel. The handwritten note said my father's name was Michael Harrison. It said he'd been born in 1955 in Philadelphia, that he'd built a real estate empire across the Northeast, and that he was worth approximately $1.3 billion as of the last valuation in the report, dated 2 years ago. It said he'd never known about me. It said my mother had made a choice to keep me away from him, and she'd taken that choice to her grave. Except she hadn't. Not really, because she'd left me the proof. There was a phone number at the bottom of the note, in my mother's careful handwriting, a 215 area code, Philadelphia. I didn't call it that day, or the next day, or the day after that. For 2 weeks, I went through the motions of being a person. I sorted through my mother's things, packed up her teaching materials, donated her clothes to Goodwill. Jennifer helped me, asking careful questions about the funeral arrangements and whether I needed anything. I didn't tell her about the letter. I didn't tell anyone. The folder with the investigator's report sat in my apartment in Arlington, hidden in the back of my bedroom closet behind a box of winter scarves. I went back to work on November 1st. Derek had sent flowers to the funeral, a big arrangement of lilies that made the house smell like a funeral parlor. When I walked into the office, everyone made that specific face, the sad, careful face people make when they don't know what to say to someone whose parent just died. "Ashley, welcome back," Derek said, his hand on my shoulder again. "We've really missed you around here. Don't push yourself too hard, okay? Just ease back in." I nodded and went to my desk, which was exactly as I'd left it. My monitor was dark. My desk calendar still showed October. In the past 3 weeks, my mother had died. I discovered I had a billionaire father, and the world had continued turning like none of it mattered. That night, sitting in my apartment with the investigator's report spread across my kitchen table, I made a decision. I was going to find Michael Harrison. Not to ask for money. The thought made me feel sick, like I'd be confirming something ugly about myself. I was going to find him because my mother had wanted me to, because there was a missing piece of my own story, and I was tired of living with the gap. I started with social media. Michael Harrison wasn't hard to find. His company, Harrison Properties, had a website with a bio and a photo. He was 58 years old, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit in the kind of corporate headshot that tried very hard to look candid and natural. He had a square jaw and green eyes, and when I looked at my own reflection in the mirror and really studied my face, I could see him there. The shape of my eyes, the line of my chin. There was no personal Instagram, no Facebook page, but Harrison Properties had an Instagram account, and I scrolled through photos of glass and steel buildings, gleaming lobbies, ribbon-cutting ceremonies where Michael stood in the center with a scissors, smiling for the camera. I found an article from the Philadelphia Business Journal from 6 months ago. Real estate titan Michael Harrison to marry socialite Karen Whitmore in summer wedding. I clicked on the link with shaking hands. There were photos from their engagement party. Karen Whitmore was blonde, beautiful, probably 35 years old, wearing a white dress that cost more than my annual salary. Michael had his arm around her, and they were both laughing. The caption read, "Local developer Michael Harrison, 58, pictured with his fiancée Karen Whitmore, 35, at their engagement celebration at the Rittenhouse Hotel. The couple is planning a summer wedding and honeymoon in the south of France." I closed the browser and put my head down on the table. This was real. This wasn't some abstract fact buried in legal documents. This man had a whole life, a fiancé, a life that had nothing to do with me and nothing to do with my mother, and nothing to do with the secret that had apparently been kept for 28 years. I called Jennifer that night. "Hey, you okay?" she answered on the second ring. "You sound weird." "Can you come over?" I asked. She was at my apartment 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and her worried face. I poured us both glasses and told her everything. The letter, the investigator's report, the name, the phone number, the photo of Michael Harrison in his expensive suit with his beautiful fiancée. Jennifer listened without interrupting, her eyes getting bigger and bigger. "Oh my God," she finally said when I finished. "Ashley, that's huge." "I know. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. The thought of calling that number made my stomach turn. What would I even say? "Hi, Dad. Surprise! You have a daughter you never knew about, and your secret's been kept for 28 years. And my mother just died, and I found out on her nightstand?" "You need to talk to him," Jennifer said firmly. "You need to tell him. He deserves to know." "Why does he deserve to know?" The question came out harder than I meant it to. "He didn't deserve to know for 28 years. My mother made that choice." "But you didn't," Jennifer said, "and now you know. And I think you need to do this for you, not for him." I didn't call him that night, or the next week, but I started preparing. I drafted emails in my phone's notes app, deleting them and starting over. I practiced what I'd say out loud in my car on the drive to work. I stalked his Instagram account until I'd memorized the layout of his buildings, the color of his office, the names of his business partners. And then, exactly 3 weeks after I found the letter, I drove to Philadelphia. I didn't tell anyone. Not Jennifer, not Derek, no one. I took a personal day, threw some clothes in an overnight bag, and drove up I-95 in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I'd looked up the address of Harrison Properties headquarters, a gleaming tower in Center City with his name on the directory in the lobby. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes, watching people come and go, trying to work up the courage to walk inside. The investigator's report said Michael usually arrived at the office around 8:30 in the morning. It was nearly 9 now. He might already be up there. I might walk into the elevator in 5 minutes and see him face to face. The thought made me feel like I was going to throw up. I didn't go in. Instead, I sat there and I cried. I cried for my mother, who'd taken this secret to the grave. I cried for myself, for the version of me that existed in a world where my father knew I existed. I cried because I was terrified, terrified of rejection, terrified of acceptance, terrified of everything. My phone buzzed, a text from Jennifer. "Where are you? You didn't show up at the coffee shop?" I'd forgotten we'd made plans. Of course I had. I drove back to Arlington that afternoon. I didn't call Michael Harrison. I didn't go to his office. I just went home and sat in my apartment and tried to convince myself that some secrets were meant to stay buried. But they weren't. They couldn't be. Because secrets have a way of poisoning everything they touch, and I was already poisoned. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through the Philadelphia Business Journal's website at 11 at night, unable to sleep, when I saw the headline, "Harrison Properties CEO Michael Harrison cancels wedding, admits to secret daughter in shocking press conference." My heart stopped. I clicked the link with shaking fingers, and there it was. A photo of Michael Harrison at a podium, looking pale and tired, with a microphone in front of him. The article was from that morning. In a stunning turn of events, real estate developer Michael Harrison held a press conference this morning to announce that he is the biological father of a 28-year-old woman named Ashley Morgan, the daughter of his former girlfriend, Linda Morgan, who passed away 3 weeks ago. According to Harrison, he had no knowledge of his daughter's existence until he received a letter from his lawyers this past week. I couldn't breathe. The article continued. Harrison stated that he is immediately stepping back from his engagement to Karen Whitmore and his day-to-day operations at Harrison Properties to focus on making this right. He also announced the creation of a trust fund in his daughter's name, valued at approximately $50 million. $50 million. The room spun. I read the article 3 times, each time expecting it to say something different, for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. They stayed exactly the same. Michael Harrison had told the world about me, before I'd even told him about myself. My phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. I turned it off and sat in the dark of my apartment, trying to understand what had just happened. How had he found out? The article didn't say. It just said he'd received a letter from his lawyers. My mother's lawyers. Of course. The will. She'd probably left instructions, probably had the investigator send everything to Michael once she was gone. She'd orchestrated this from beyond the grave, and I'd walked right into it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and watched my phone light up with notifications. Texts from Jennifer, emails from unknown addresses, a voicemail from a number labeled Harrison Properties. By morning, my apartment building's doorman had called upstairs to tell me there was a man downstairs asking for me. He wouldn't leave his name. I went down in my pajamas and unwashed hair, and there he was, Michael Harrison, in person, looking exactly like his photo, but also nothing like it. He was smaller somehow, more human. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Ashley," he said when he saw me, and his voice broke on my name. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Your mother, Linda, right? I didn't know." "How did you find out?" I asked, my voice flat. "The lawyers. She set it all up before she died. They contacted me once she was gone, and God, I was so angry at first. At her, at myself, at the situation. So I called my PR team and I told them. I told everyone. I thought if I made it public, if I owned it, then I could—" He ran his hand through his hair. "I made it worse, didn't I? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." We stood there, in the lobby of my apartment building, this man who was my father and also a complete stranger, surrounded by the ambient sound of the morning, the elevator dinging, the doorman pretending not to stare, the traffic outside on the street. "I don't want your money," I said. "I know," Michael said. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" "Because I want to know you," he said. "Because I have 28 years to make up for, and I know I can't, not really, but I want to try. And because your mother left me a letter too. She left instructions. She said if I ever found out, she wanted me to tell you the truth about why she never told me about you." My breath caught. "What truth?" Michael glanced around the lobby, then back at me. "Can we go upstairs? Can we talk?" I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to say no, to close this door, to send him away and go back to my life. But he had my mother's letter, and I had to know what it said. We went upstairs to my apartment. Michael sat on my couch, the one I'd bought myself, the one that was supposed to represent my independence and my stability. And he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "She had her lawyers send this to me yesterday," he said. "She wanted you to hear it from me, but she wanted me to read it to you. She was very specific about that." He opened the envelope and began to read. "Michael," her letter started, and hearing my mother's voice in someone else's mouth was the strangest thing I'd ever experienced. "By the time you read this, I will be gone, and Ashley will know the truth. I need you to understand why I did what I did, not to forgive me, I don't expect forgiveness, but to understand." Michael's voice was steady as he continued. "I was 23 years old when I met you at that bar in Philadelphia. You were 25, ambitious, and you had already told me you didn't want children. You said it 3 times that first month. I loved you anyway. I thought I could change your mind. I was young and stupid and in love." I watched Michael's face as he read these words about himself. He looked ashamed. "When I found out I was pregnant," the letter continued through Michael's voice, "I knew I had a choice. I could tell you, and I could trap you into a life you didn't want. Or I could leave, and I could give you the freedom you'd always said you wanted. I chose the second option, not because I was noble, because I was terrified. Terrified that you would resent me, resent Ashley, that our daughter would grow up knowing her father didn't want her." Michael stopped reading. He couldn't continue. His hands were shaking and tears were streaming down his face. I sat there, listening to my mother's words, understanding for the first time why she'd never told me. She hadn't been protecting him. She'd been protecting me. "There's more," Michael finally managed, and he kept reading. Ashley is the best thing that ever happened to me. She is strong and kind, and she doesn't need you. But maybe, someday, she might want to know you. And if she does, Michael, you need to know that she's not looking for a father. She's just looking for a story. She's looking for the missing piece of herself. Please give her that. Please be honest with her. Please don't make the same mistake I did." Michael finished reading and put the letter down. We sat in silence. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. "I didn't know she was pregnant. She just left. I tried to find her, but it was before social media, before any of it. She'd changed her phone number. I eventually accepted that she didn't want me in her life, and I moved on. I got married, I got divorced, I built my company, and I never knew." "She protected me," I said quietly. "She protected both of us," Michael replied. "She protected me from a life I didn't want, and she protected you from a father who might have resented you. She made the best choice she could with the information she had." We talked for 6 hours that day. He told me about his life, about his company, about the mistakes he'd made. He told me about his ex-wife, about his failed marriage, about how he'd always wondered what his life would have been like if he'd made different choices. He asked me questions about myself, about school, about my job, about my life in Arlington. He listened to my answers like they actually mattered to him. By the time he left, the sun was setting, and something had shifted inside me. This man wasn't the villain of my story. He wasn't the hero either. He was just a person who'd made a choice, decades ago, not knowing it would ripple through time and create a daughter he'd never meet. But things weren't simple. They never are. 2 days later, I got a call from a lawyer named Patricia Chen, representing Michael's ex-fiancée, Karen Whitmore. Karen was suing Michael for breach of contract. He'd canceled their wedding without proper notice, and she was claiming emotional damages and compensation for the expenses she'd already incurred. The lawsuit was for $5 million, and it was very, very public. The media had a field day. "Billionaire's secret daughter costs him his marriage," was the headline on page 6. TMZ ran a photo of me leaving my apartment building with the caption, "Mystery daughter emerges from scandal." Jennifer called me, panicked. "Your building's being swarmed with paparazzi. Where are you?" I wasn't at my apartment. I was at Michael's office, sitting in his corner office on the 35th floor, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline, and trying to process the fact that my existence had just become public entertainment. "This is my fault," Michael said, for what must have been the 100th time. "I should have handled it differently. I should have—" "You couldn't have handled it any way that would have made this not a mess," I interrupted. "My mother kept me secret for 28 years. That's a pretty big secret. There was never going to be a clean way to reveal it." "Karen's suing me for $5 million, Michael said flatly. "She's saying I ruined her life." "You did," I said. It sounded harsh, but it was true. "You canceled your wedding. That's going to affect her. That's going to hurt her. And she's right to be angry about it." Michael looked at me like I'd slapped him. "You're defending her?" "I'm being honest," I said. "Isn't that what my mother's letter asked for? Honesty?" The lawsuit dragged on for 4 months. I hired a lawyer of my own, not for the lawsuit, but to protect myself from what was becoming an increasingly complicated situation. Michael wanted to give me money. The $50 million he'd announced in the press conference was just the beginning. He wanted to pay for my apartment, my car, my life. He wanted to make up for 28 years in one grand gesture. I refused most of it, but I did accept one thing. He paid for my mother's medical bills, the ones that had accumulated during her illness and that I'd been quietly paying off over the past 4 months. It felt like the right compromise, accepting his help, but in a way that honored my mother's memory. Karen Whitmore lost her lawsuit. The judge ruled that while Michael's behavior was undoubtedly painful, it wasn't legally actionable. She appealed. She lost again. By the end of it, she'd spent over $1 million in legal fees and had nothing to show for it except a very public humiliation. I felt bad for her, actually. She was collateral damage in a situation she'd had nothing to do with. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. 6 months after Michael first showed up at my apartment, I received a call from Patricia Chen, the lawyer representing Karen. Except Karen wasn't the one calling. Patricia was calling on behalf of Karen's mother, who had hired Patricia to investigate me. "We've uncovered some very interesting information," Patricia said smoothly over the phone, "about your employment history. It seems you were let go from your marketing position at TechVance Solutions last month. Is that correct?" My stomach dropped. "I resigned," I said carefully. "That's not what your former supervisor, Derek, has been telling people," Patricia said. "He's been telling people that you were fired for poor performance, particularly after you returned from your mother's funeral. He's also been telling people that you've been spending company time researching your newfound billionaire father and that your productivity suffered as a result." This was news to me. I'd quit because I couldn't handle being at that office anymore, couldn't handle the pitying looks and the uncomfortable questions about my secret family. But I hadn't realized Derek had been spreading lies about why I'd left. "What do you want?" I asked Patricia. "We want you to convince Michael to settle with Karen," Patricia said. "Out of court, quietly, $5 million, like she originally asked for. In exchange, we'll make sure these stories about your employment history don't go public. We'll also make sure Karen signs an NDA and stops pursuing legal action." I was silent for a long moment. "You're blackmailing me." "We're negotiating," Patricia said smoothly. "Michael clearly cares about you. A public scandal about your employment history, about you being fired and then immediately benefiting from your father's guilt, would look very bad. Very much like you orchestrated this whole situation for money." "I didn't," I said. "I know that," Patricia said, "but perception is everything." I hung up and called Michael immediately. "Don't you dare settle with her," I said. "Don't you dare." "Ashley, if it means protecting you—" "It means nothing," I said. "It means they win. It means they get to extort money from you, and they get to silence me, and they get to control the narrative. I won't let that happen." "What are you going to do?" Michael asked quietly. "I'm going to fight back," I said. What I did next was probably not smart, but it was necessary. I called a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, a woman named Susan Walsh, who'd written one of the more balanced pieces about Michael and me. I told her everything, about Patricia's blackmail, about Derek's lies, about how Karen's legal team was trying to extort money in exchange for silence. Susan's article ran on Sunday. "Real estate developer's ex-fiancé accused of extortion in continued legal battle," was the headline. The article detailed Patricia's phone call, included comments from my lawyer about the blackmail attempt, and quoted Michael saying he would not be settling with Karen under any circumstances. Patricia called Michael's lawyer within an hour. The extortion threat was withdrawn. Karen's lawyers sent a letter saying they were dropping the lawsuit. But Patricia wasn't done. She'd been humiliated, and humiliated lawyers are dangerous. 3 days after the article ran, a story appeared on a gossip blog claiming that I'd been the one to orchestrate my mother's discovery of Michael, that I'd hired the private investigator myself to locate him, and that my mother's letter was fabricated. The story claimed I was a gold digger who'd manipulated a dying woman into helping me find a billionaire father. It was a lie. Every word of it was a lie. But it didn't matter. The story spread. TMZ picked it up. Twitter exploded. Within 24 hours, I'd gone from sympathetic daughter discovering her roots to scheming con artist who manipulated her dying mother. People who'd never met me had very strong opinions about who I was and what I'd done. My lawyer said we could sue for defamation, but it would be expensive and take years. Michael wanted to hire a PR firm to do damage control. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I did something else. I went back to my apartment, I pulled out the original investigator's report, and I called the investigator directly. His name was David Reeves, and he'd been hired by my mother through her lawyer, not by me. He agreed to make a public statement confirming this. Then I released my mother's letter. All of it. Not just the parts Michael had read to me, but the entire thing, including the parts where she explained why she'd never told Michael about me, why she'd wanted to protect both of us, and why she'd wanted me to find him after she was gone. I released it through a statement to the press, read by my lawyer. I didn't do interviews. I didn't go on television. I just let my mother's words speak for themselves. The narrative shifted again. Suddenly, I wasn't a scheming con artist. I was a young woman whose dying mother had left her with an impossible secret, and I was doing my best to navigate an impossible situation. The gossip blogs apologized. Patricia Chen was reported to the Bar Association by my lawyer for her blackmail attempt. Karen Whitmore's name faded from the headlines. And me? I became, briefly, famous for being the secret daughter of a billionaire real estate developer. It was awful. It was invasive. It was the opposite of everything I'd ever wanted. But it was also the truth. And once the truth was out there, once everyone knew the whole story, I could finally start to move forward. Michael and I didn't become close overnight. We couldn't. We had too much history to overcome, too much time to make up for, too many complications. But we started to build something. A relationship that wasn't quite father-daughter, but wasn't quite stranger either. Something new. He helped me pay off my mother's house, which I'd inherited. He never pushed me to accept more money than I was comfortable with. He respected the boundaries I set, and he didn't try to rewrite our story to make himself look better. 6 months later, I took a job at a smaller marketing firm in Philadelphia. I didn't do it because Michael asked me to. I did it because I was ready for a fresh start, and being in the same city as him felt right. Jennifer moved in with me. We found a cute row house in Rittenhouse Square, which Michael offered to help with the down payment on. I let him this time. A year after my mother died, I stood in the kitchen of her old house, which I decided to keep rather than sell, and I made her kindergarten pasta salad recipe, the one she'd made every summer. Michael came over for dinner. Jennifer brought wine. We sat on the back porch and watched the sunset, and nobody talked about billionaires or secrets or the strange circumstances that had brought us together. It was just dinner. It was just family. My mother had wanted me to find my father, and I had. But what I'd actually found was something more complicated and more real than either of us had expected. I'd found a person. I'd found a story. And I'd found out that the most important secrets aren't the ones we keep from other people. They're the ones we keep from ourselves. Michael looked at me across the table and said, "Your mother was the smartest person I ever knew. She knew exactly what she was doing." "She did," I agreed. "I wish I'd had the chance to thank her," he said. "I think," I replied, "she knew you would." And in that moment, sitting on my mother's porch with my father and my best friend, eating food she'd taught me to make, I finally understood what she'd meant in those last moments in the hospital. When she'd said I was going to find out who I really was, she hadn't meant finding Michael, she'd meant finding myself.